So we're going through the themes of paradise, and you guys heard this one last time, but we didn't record it, so I thought we'd go through it again. So we've gone over this hadith a number of times. Is that the Sahaba came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they said, "Oh emissary of Allah, oh Ya Rasulullah, we behold you when we in front of you. When we behold you, our hearts become soft, and we feel like we are people of the paradise. But the problem is what? When we go home, we become distracted by our families and the world around us, and we lose that state." And so the Prophet ﷺ explained to them, you know what, if you were to remain in that state continuously, then the angels would come and brush their hands against yours and visit you in your homes. If you were to constantly feel that state that you are in front of me, then the angelic world, the subtle world around you would become apparent and will come and grace you and honour you. But he said, then the Prophet ﷺ said, but if you were to not sin, God would remove you and replace you with another set. So that's part of our nature, the yin and the yang. Sometimes we've got to feel close to Allah, sometimes we haven't. That's part of it. And so then he said, then the Sahaba, they asked, "Oh emissary of Allah, tell us about the garden." So they knew that this was when they were together with the Prophet ﷺ, he made them feel as if they were people of paradise. And so when the Sahaba would come together, they would love to recall about paradise. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, if my memory serves me correct, he then asks, the question he asks, tell me about the buildings of paradise. And so, and the Prophet ﷺ said, its structure, i.e. the walls around it, because a garden, the way we see a garden is the blend between nature and civilization. So we have this raw nature in front of us that's very scary. If you were to live in the jungle, you'd find it very, very difficult to survive. So what does man do to the natural world? He cultivates it in order that it becomes livable. And this is what man's been doing since the beginning of time. And so the garden is a symbol of that cultivation, us harmonizing with nature but making it livable. And then the garden itself, in fact, the word paradise in Arabic, word paradise in English, that comes from Farsi, I think, to the best of my knowledge, it's Persian, which Arabic we get firdaus from, means a walled garden. Because if we want to feel safe, what do? We put a wall around. Yeah, Pakistanis put gates around their houses, don't they? Okay, and they have to tell everyone who they are. They're Qazi, someone or something. Why? Because you need to assert yourself. You feel that you need to put boundaries to say, this is who I am, and this is where I live, and this is where, don't come in unless you are welcome. And so that's a symbol of the garden. The garden is a walled garden, and the walls are made of brick and silver. Made of gold and silver. The bricks, the structure of paradise, the structures are made of gold and silver, we said, and the mortar, i.e. the cement that fills between the bricks, are made smell of musk, but they're like saffron, because we said that the soil of paradise is like the finest flour, and so it's almost got a yellow sort of tinge to it, like saffron, and it's so soft that it just flows through your fingers, and it smells like musk. And then the pebbles and the precious. Then we have the garden being made of. The buildings also being made of pearls and precious stones. And so we have two main structures that we have in our homes. Once we actually enter paradise, that Allah says that the people will actually know where their houses are. He said, as we said, the Prophet ﷺ said that when we enter paradise, angels or young children with excitement will lead us to our homes, and as if we were like a long-awaited guest or someone who had been far from home for such a long time, and it's like a coming home. And the Prophet ﷺ said this, he said, we will be led to our homes like we knew them better than our own, and it will be like when we go back from Jumu'ah. So this is the description it is. It's like, you know, when you finished your Jumu'ah prayer, and then you go home, and traditionally in Morocco this was the case, is that after Jumu'ah, what do you get when you go home? Dinner. And Friday was always the best meal. You always got couscous on Friday. In Morocco, if you don't have couscous on Friday, it feels like the week's not, you know, it's not complete. And so I would always go to my friend's house every Friday. I have the, I don't know if it's a shameful thing or an honour. I lived 8 years in Morocco. I never cooked a meal once in my life. I don't know if that's something to boast about. But because the people were so generous that I just knock on their door and say, you've been blessed. And that's how I lived. I think I cooked maybe an egg. That's about as adventurous as I got. And so that Jumu'ah was, once you leave the Jumu'ah prayer, you bond with the community, and then you go and you see people you maybe haven't seen over the week, and then you go home with excitement, and you're led there as if you're like on sat-nav. You don't even have automatic pilot. You don't even know. That's how we will be when we go home. And so, as I said, always to use these analogies, these symbols, to remind one another. So when we say you're coming back from a journey, you remind your child, or you remind your friends, look, do you know the excitement you get when you come back from a trip? You know that feeling you're back in Bradford? Oh, BD3's got all the delights of the restaurants just on your doorstep. And you go and you just think, there's nowhere like Bradford. And you feel that excitement, don't you, when you're coming back? You can smell the curry before it even reaches you, you know, before it's even in front of you, and you think it's the cheapest and it's the best. And so that's how it will be like when we get to paradise. And so to remind yourself, just like when you're coming back from a trip, or when you're going back home from after prayer or from after work, that it's almost automatic pilot, isn't it? You get to a point on the journey where it's just like, turn the sat-nav off now, we know where we're going. That's how we will be when we get into paradise. And Allah says about that, and this is really beautiful, He says, وَالَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, those who are killed in the way of Allah, they sacrifice their lives for Allah, فَلَن يُضِلَّ أَعْمَالَهُم, He will never let their acts go to waste. Because people think, oh, he's died, what a waste. But Allah's saying, no, that person that died, it's not a waste. سَيَهْدِيهِمْ, He will guide them even after they die. وَيُصْلِحُ بَالَهُمْ, and He will rectify their state. وَيُدْخِلُهُمُ الْجَنَّةَ عَرَّفَهَا لَهُمْ, He will enter them into the garden that He will make known to them. This verb, عَرَّفَ, means He will make it known to them, i.e. they will know their house. But there's another interpretation of this verb, عَرَّفَ, that comes from عَرْف, which means scent, i.e. they will smell it. Yeah? I.e. they will, you know, like when you smell something, because the first thing that we are scent, it's been given to us because it's the first thing. What does scent do? It detects danger. You know, and especially what I've heard is, Allah knows best, women have even higher scent because they are more concerned about the safety of children and so forth. They pick up smells quicker than men. Have you ever noticed that? Your missus go, if you've left the gas on, has that ever happened to you? Adnan obviously has. Huh? Oh, the iron. Yeah, okay. Women pick up on it. Why? Because women are more concerned about safety than men, because they've got to think about themselves and their family. That's why if you ever have a bit of a road scare, she gives it to you stinking, doesn't she? She says to me, "Don't you ever do that again. We've got kids in the back, and you dare go at that speed again," because they're concerned about safety. But also on the other side, scent is about pleasurable scent as well. That they pick up on these things, and so. It was as if when you go into paradise, you smell your home. It's got its own scent, and you recognise it. And then Allah says about them, وَلَكِنَّ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا رَبَّهُمْ, but those who have reverence for their Lord, لَهُمْ غُرُفٌ مِنْ فَوْقِهِمْ غُرُفٌ, they will have rooms over rooms. He says, and he uses min fawqihim. In Arabic that means on top, directly on top. So one apartment upon another apartment. And ghuraf means to do this. It means to scoop something like a ladle. So when you see, you basically have to do that. Whoa! Okay, it's really high. It's really high up. And then on top of that, something on high, will be these rooms. Mabaniya, they're constructed. Tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, flowing from beneath them, the rivers. Wa'dullah, the promise of Allah. La yukhlifu Allahu wa'dah. Allah never breaks His promise. يُدْخِلُهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ He enters them into gardens, تَجْرِي flowing from beneath them the rivers, وَمَسَاكِنُ طَيِّبَةٍ وَمَسَاكِنَ طَيِّبَةٍ فِي جَنَّاتِ عَدْنٍ. He said these masakin, now sakan means to feel tranquility. So you're in this place, that's what Allah wants to express here, and sweet, scented, or just goodness about them, these homes. You sit in them and there's nothing to fear, because that's what a home is. If you think about a home, what's a home? It's a place of security, it's a place where you can let yourself go. You can get in your gym jams and you're not bothered. When you're outside, you've got to you've got to present yourself, haven't you? When you get home, you just get into your gym jams and you just relax and you think, forget about everything. That's what a home is. Fi jannati Aden, in the gardens of Aden. Aden is a place. Aden means to be a place of stability, a place that was permanent. That's what Aden means. Some say Aden is the closest, is the highest point of paradise. Remember, we've mentioned this a number of times. Is that paradise is either, you can look at it as a pyramid upside down, or as a dome upside down, because the highest point is the vastest point. Does that make sense? Like the lowest point of garden is the smallest part, and then as you go up, the gardens get bigger. So that means it's like this. So it's either like a dome or like a pyramid, you can imagine it. And so, ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ, that is the true triumph. That's the greatest of triumph. And then we have them known as ghurfa, these high quarters, or we have them as masakin, places of tranquility. And then Allah says, talking about Sayyidah Asiya alayhi salam, what does she ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? After all her trial in her life, after all her struggles with Fir'aun, and then her declaring her faith, and her being persecuted and killed eventually for it, she makes this dua, Rabbi. She doesn't say Ya Rabbi, she says it personally to herself, Rabbi. And she says it shortly, she says Rabbi, she doesn't say Rabbi, as if to say, I'm in desperation here. Rabbi, my Lord, Ibni li, build specifically for me. So she's saying, I've sacrificed, I've given up, I've stood up for the truth. For that, build specifically for me. Indaka, so for me, in your presence, a house. Notice the order. So she's focusing on me, I've made this sacrifice, so Allah wants something for me special now. But she's not even thinking about the house yet. She's thinking about being in your presence. Because as I say, choose your neighbour before your house. So she's thinking about Allah before the garden. And then she says baitan, and she uses the word bait. And bait expresses that is a place where you find security at night. So, you go there, it's dark at night, you're worried about your security, you go to this place and you find tranquility. Obviously, Asiya lived in a life of darkness. She didn't feel safe. She was in the vastest of palaces. She was living it up. She was what's Donald Trump's wife's name? What's her name? There you go. Thank you. What's her name? Melania, is it? Yeah. There she is. Poor woman. And she's got it all, but she's miserable. She won't even let him hold her hand. And now, because of that sacrifice, well, I don't know if Melania is going to get it, but Asiya, she had it all vast in the dunya, but she gave it up, and she didn't want it. And so Allah gives her something greater, fil jannati. And I always say, people who are in all these verses, when you take this context, these are supposed to be meditated upon. People are in these circumstances. They're in a circumstance where they're being oppressed, they're being victimized, and they stand up for the truth, and they can't find a way out. They make du'as like this. Rabbi. So you meditate upon these personalities that are in the Quran. And so Allah says, now, what's the significance of a house? If you think about palaces, we have palaces in paradise. The Prophet ﷺ, when he went to the garden, he saw three people specifically, the traces of them in the garden. First was Sulaym. Sulaym, she was the mother of Anas ibn Malik. She was the one who's the famous story where a child died in infancy, and then her husband came home. And she didn't inform him. She didn't want to break his heart, so he was fasting, so she helped break his fast. She laid with him, and then in the morning he got so upset. If everyone's familiar with the story, and Sulaym, because she lost her first husband, he left Medina because he didn't want to accept Islam. she wanted her son to have a true role model, Anas ibn Malik. So because he didn't have a father figure now, so she gave him to the Prophet ﷺ to serve him for 10 years. And she was the one that when the second man, Abu Talha, came to marry her, he came thinking, oh, she'll marry me. And then she said, I'm not interested. And he went, oh, it's because you want my money, I'll give you more then. She said, I'm not interested in money. If you accept Islam, I don't want a da'wah. She says, I don't want the sadaq, the haqq al-mahar. And so he thought about it that night, and then he accepted Islam. She's a very strong woman. And then when she used to sleep, the Prophet ﷺ used to sleep in her house, she would collect vials of his sweat to use as perfume and ointment for her family. So he actually, because of her, she dedicated, when the Prophet ﷺ married Zainab, she offered food for the wedding, and people just kept coming and coming and coming and eating from this small dish. So she was a woman of big intentions. And the Prophet ﷺ, he saw her he heard of her in paradise. Who else? He heard Bilal's, the footsteps of Bilal. And then so when he woke up, he saw him in a dream. He came to Bilal and he said, how did you beat me to it, Bilal? You got to paradise before me. How did you get there? So the Prophet was like this. He liked to pull people's legs. And then he says, how did you get there? And so he pondered. He thought, well, what do I do? When I give the adhan, I make sure afterwards I perform 2 rakas, and in another narration, every time I perform wudu, I break my wudu, I make it again, and then I perform 2 rakas. And so the Prophet ﷺ, this is why I heard your footsteps in paradise. And then he saw he saw this palace made of gold, bright white gold, and it had a courtyard, and the Prophet ﷺ caught sight there of a fair young lady in there, and he wished to go in there just to marvel at this thing, but he felt shy because he said, who is this? He said, the angel said it belongs to a young youth from amongst the Quraysh. And he said, who's that? He says, Umar ibn Khattab. And he said, whoa, I'm not going in there. He says, I realised that Umar, he's a man of privacy. And so and then he told the Prophet ﷺ the next day, he said, Umar, I saw your palace in paradise, and I became shy because I know you're a private person. He says, how can I be private in front of you, O Messenger of Allah? And so so what does it? If you think about it, boys generally build sandcastles, don't they? And girls like their doll houses. We're obsessed with buildings and structures, if you think about it, even from a young age. And a castle is a symbol of protecting something that's special to you. So if you think about it, in its fairy tales, you have palaces, or you have these high apartments like Rapunzel. Is it Rapunzel with the long hair? Yeah. It's a woman. The symbol of a young bride or a young maiden is the vulnerable, vibrant side of you. Like in dreams and in fairy tales, that young woman is a sign of vibrancy and life. But then a man, what does a man have to do in society? He has to guard that, doesn't he? He has to protect his vulnerable side, because if you show your vulnerability to people, what happens? You get laughed at, and so you have to pretend that you're the knight, and that your vulnerable side is somewhere you lock away and keep protected from people. But in paradise, what's amazing about our places, they can be seen in and out of. So we're not scared, because we know there's no one's going to take advantage of us, and no one is going to manipulate us, no one's going to mock us. But what's amazing is the distances between people who can see in are the distance of some narrations 30 miles, some 60 miles. So even though it's completely open, people still can't see in. You still have privacy. So it's a sign that in paradise you can be completely open, and still no one's going to be seen. Like, you've got complete freedom to be who you are. This is the symbol of these things. And then it says, the people's stations will be so far above one another that it will be like the Prophet ﷺ cited. Do you know when you see the last star at night, that bright star? He says the people above the others will be that far. You see them that far. So, like, this is another thing. When the Prophet ﷺ does this, he ponders upon nature. We bring that, so we reflect on that. When we see a star in the sky, think, "Wow, Subhanallah!" In paradise, we'll be looking up at people like that. And then the Sahaba said, "Well, that's going to be the station of the prophets. We're not going to be there, and we're going to be so far away from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." And then the Prophet ﷺ, he clarified, no, this is for a people. People have the station so far, the star and the fire. No, not prophets, but those who believed in Allah and His Messenger. And so just for that, people who have true faith. And then the Prophet ﷺ said to Abu Bakr, I hope that you, Abu Bakr and Umar, this is related to Abu Dawood, he says, and you will be from amongst them. So Abu Bakr and Umar, there will be those people who have the highest place in paradise, and people looking above at them in their stations. And their houses will be constructed from different precious stones. But not just this, we won't just have palaces like this, we will have tents. But these tents, as Allah describes in the Quran, حُورٌ مَقْصُورَاتٌ فِي الْخِيَامِ, that the maidens of paradise will be concealed in these tents. But these tents will be hollowed out pearl. So they won't be fabric. They will be, if you imagine a pearl and it's been hollowed out, this will be a symbol of, this will be the tents that are around our palaces. What's the importance, what's the symbol of a pearl? A pearl is something that you have that's incredibly special. If you think about it, I have a friend, he was from Kuwait, and he mentioned to me that his grandfather lived at a time when Kuwait had nothing. They hadn't even discovered any oil, and so what they had to do for a living was they had to go deep sea pearl diving. They had these little boats, and they had their shorts on, and they basically had to dive down with no apparatus. They had nothing. It's very dangerous, and they had to go right down to the bottom of the ocean just to try to find the oysters that held the pearl. And this is another symbol of something that you guard and protect. Again, so in the paradise, you even and it's also some of the earlier cultures, they saw a pearl as a symbol of the soul. Like you have the oyster, and that's the physical body, and within it you have your pearl, the most precious part of you, which is your soul. So your soul, you will be as if you're basically living in your soul from a symbolic point of view. The pearl is you completely being transparent and open and free. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ said about this, that these tents will be 60 miles to 30 miles high, and 30 miles to 60 miles across in width. So no one, and in each corner, the Prophet, he says, in each corner the person will have their spouse is there for them, and where they will have decent privacy with them and be able to enjoy one another. And he says, Angel Jibreel alayhi salam once came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Khadija's coming, and inform her that she will have a tent, a place in paradise of pearl, in which there will be no hardship and no noise. And she was carrying, Khadija radiallahu anha, the food of the Prophet ﷺ, and because she sacrificed so much in this life for the Prophet ﷺ, she had really, literally, her health deteriorated after when? After the 2-year embargo on the Muslims, her health seriously deteriorated, and because of that sacrifice, because of all that struggle, because of putting up with all the abuse of the Quraysh for the sake of her husband, that she's given a home where she's got no more toil, no more struggle, no more suffering, in a house of pearl. And there's another narration, it's a weaker narration though, this one, is that Ibrahim alayhi salam, he also will have this place of pearl because of all these tents of pearl, because of all his struggles again, Ibrahim alayhi salam, all the sacrifice he had to give in order to establish Allah's faith on the earth, being thrown into the fire, being tortured by his people, being persecuted and thrown out, his wife being taken away from him, but nearly taken away from him in Egypt, then Hajar leaving him and leaving his own child, all these sacrifices. Because of that, he's given a place where there's no hardship and there's no noise, just complete peace and tranquility. So, how do we gain these places? The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever wants a house in paradise, they pray 12 extra rakas in the day. What do we mean, the 12 extra rakas? 2 before Fajr. Huh? How many before Dhuhr? 4. How many after Dhuhr? 2. Okay, then after Maghrib?
6.
Yeah, you can do that as well. We're just talking about the 12. So, after Maghrib, we're talking about Sunnah Mu'akkadas basically. 2, and then after Isha, 2. Have I got 12 there? You've done the maths? 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, we haven't, have we? No, 2 before Fajr, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, we got it. Yeah, that's 12 there. Okay. So if you do your Sunnah Mu'akkadas, there you go, house in paradise. If you maintain that throughout your life. Whoever builds a place of worship on the earth, Allah will give him in paradise. Allah says, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever builds a house in this life, whoever builds a place of worship in this house, Allah will build him abode in paradise. In one narration, even if it's the circumference of a desert grouse's nest. What desert grouses do, you know, these birds that walk, they rarely fly. They build a little nest in the sand in order for their eggs to place. That's space, basically. It says whoever dedicates a place of worship, even if it's that space, Allah will give him a place in paradise. And so it's not just saying a mosque necessarily. It's a place where people devote themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter how small. That's another person who will get a place in paradise. Who else? People who show patience and forbearance and determination in their lives. Allah says, أُولَٰئِكَ يُجَزَوْنَ الْغُرْفَةَ بِمَا صَبَرُوا. Those people, they will be requited with the ghurfa, and with the room, the living quarters. And this is used as genus to say the ultimate living quarters, that they beyond their imagination. Why? بِمَا صَبَرُوا, because of their constant showing of patience. So people who can control themselves, and people who can not lash out, people who can have some forbearance and think about the future and the repercussions of those things. I always find that helps. If you ever think of doing sin, you just think of someone, you just think of the repercussions if people were to catch you. And I think the dunyawi repercussions, I'm a person that's worried about my image, sorry. So I just think about, if anyone finds out that Idris has done something, I just think, oh my God, that would be so embarrassing, I'm not doing that. And it solves it. You just have to work out what motivates you. You know, what would motivate you not to sin? And imagine that, and it genuinely protect it. Those people constantly engaging in that, Allah will give them a house in paradise. Those who has a child that dies in his infancy, and on the moment of being informed of his death, he says, Alhamdulillah, inna lillahi wa inni ilayhi raji'un. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Verily we belong to Allah, and to him we are perpetually returning. Allah says, what did he goes to the angels? What did he say? He said this. He says, give him the house of hamd, because he said Alhamdulillah. He has a house of praise in paradise. He said, now, who else? Those who constantly engages in righteous deeds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بِالَّتِي تُقَرِّبُكُمْ عِنْدَنَا زُلْفَى. It's not your wealth that draws you near to us closely. Rather, it's those who believe and do a righteous deed. Do something righteous for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأُولَٰئِكَ, those, لَهُمْ جَزَاءُ الضِّعْفِ, they will have their reward multiplied. بِمَا عَمِلُوا, because what they did, وَهُمْ فِي الْغُرَفَاتِ, and they are in these apartments, lofty high apartments, like on turrets. Yep, why? وَهُمْ فِي الْغُرَفَاتِ, they're in these lofty turrets, آمِنُونَ, safe. And that's why I said about the castles are symbolic of safety, and you feeling like you can be yourself. You don't have to put on airs anymore. You don't have to fear people manipulating and taking advantage of you. Also, as we said about Bilal, repeating wudu after breaking it. Also, there's a hadith that relates that whoever recites Surah Ikhlas 10 times, he will have a house in paradise. Whoever recites it 20 times will have how many? 2. And whoever recites it 3 times will have 30. Umar says, how many palaces are we going to have? He says, my God, you know, what space is going to run out. And the Prophet says, you're going to get more than that, Umar. He says, you think that's amazing? There's more than you're going to get than even that. And then a Bedouin came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, who are these houses for? And the Prophet ﷺ said, he who feeds the people, who speaks softly and kindly, who fasts regularly and prays at night when people are asleep. And so there's a weak narration of this. It says, what's the interpretation of who feeds the poor? It says, he who feeds his family. Alhamdulillah, that's straightforward. He who speaks softly, it says, and speaks good words. Who are they? Those who say Subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar. And Sayyidina Ibrahim, when the Prophet ﷺ met with him in the 7 heavens, he said to him, tell your ummah, give my salam to them, tell them that this is if you want to get some produce in the next life, in the paradise, then say, do awfully what? Subhanallahi walhamdulillahi wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar. He says, and fast regularly. He says, who he? Who's he? This isn't a weak narration, so we're encouraged to fast as much as we, whatever you possibly can regularly. But in one narration, it means just he who fasts Ramadan regularly every year. And then he says, and prays at night when people are asleep. One interpretation of that is that he just prays his Isha prayer. So paradise is easy. We just have to basically do things regularly in our lives and try to do the best we can and not take advantage of other people and show good character. That's the houses of paradise. Subhanallah, Allah grant them to us.